And welcome back to the Op Show, where we bring you the trials and tribulations, the automations and collaborations from the world of DevOps and the greater developer experience. I'm your host, Tristan Pollock. And in our best show yet, we have Rob Barnes, otherwise known as DevOps Rob. He's a platform architect, senior developer advocate at HashiCorp, and an old Englander. I don't know, I guess versus New Englander. Maybe I'm maybe too American, but welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Pleasure is all ours. And, kick us off with a little bit of your code story. How did you get into development, and, how did you kind of get into this position at HashiCorp? Like, draw us the line.
Interesting story. So I actually started off life as a project manager, or working in that kind of project kind of field, which I thought I loved it at the time, but turns out I didn't. So I was working for a government department called Transport for London, and I was working on a project team that was looking after the anyone that's from London knows the congestion charge zone. So we were responsible for the technology that enabled that. So whilst that was fun, I had to work alongside a lot of engineers, and when you saw what they were doing and you compared it to what I was doing, I kind of realized I was in the wrong field. So that's kind of where my journey started. And from there, I think my journey is quite similar to a lot of people from more the ops side of things. So, I've taken like help desk roles, and from there, and I went into sort of network engineering, and then I did things like infrastructure engineering and more server administrator kind of stuff. And that was kind of my gateway into the world of DevOps. And I've had roles in so many different sectors. And if you see my CV, you'll see how many different companies I've worked for.
What's the favorite companies? What are some of your favorite companies, and why?
Oh, my favorite companies. This one's not particularly my favorite company in terms of the role itself. I did get bored really quickly, which is kind of a theme with me. I'm easily bored. But Cancer Research was a charity that I did some work for. My dad died 10 years ago of cancer. So, working for an organization like that was something that was quite close to my heart. Aside from that, there's another company I work for called NCC Group. Definitely hold a big place in my heart there. I probably made majority of my big strides forward in my career at NCC Group. And that's largely down to really good leadership. So I definitely want to shout out Tony Sanders, who is the IT director over there. He gave me so much support and just enabled me to just grow and just do really great things. So I'd say those are probably my two favorite outside of HashiCorp.
All right, sounds good. Well, I'll make sure to shout out Tony Sanders. That's for sure. Well, it's great to hear. I mean, we hear such storied, trials of different people getting into, DevOps or development in all these different ways. And half the time, I think maybe 60+% of the time on this show, it's like somebody started in like the musical side, like, playing drums or guitar or like flute. Like we've had like a little bit of everything. Did you, was there any musical inclination with your story?
It's like you've read my mind. So, so I used to be a music producer as well.
Whoa, all right.
I've been making music since I was maybe 15 years old. Was when my dad bought my first keyboard. It was a Korg Triton, if I remember correctly.
Oh, okay.
Was it a Triton or a Trinity? Oh, I can't remember. It was one of the two. So yeah, I was making, back then I was heavily into sort of hip hop and R&B. So I was doing a lot of that kind of stuff. And then as I grew a bit older, I started getting exposed to different types of music. And then I got really into like the house scene, like especially South African house and deep house. So I was making a lot of that, which if you search hard enough, you'll find some of my songs on SoundCloud.
Under DevOps Rob?
Definitely not under DevOps Rob. It's under a musical alias. I'll tell you what it is. So I used to go by the name Bobby Ray, which is, my middle name is Ray and my family calls me Bobby.
Okay.
So it's a nickname my uncle gave to me when I was a kid. So yeah, I kind of ran with that. So yeah, I have some house music out there.
I can't wait to check it out because I'm a big deep house fan, and I love like the South African kind of black coffee like vibe. It's great, and I think being in England, like England has like a really interesting musical scene and like kind of innovative musical scene, especially within hip hop and house music. So excited to check that out. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I mean, there's this kind of, is it like this kind of math connection between like music and producing and then like development and like do you feel like there's a similar like kind of brain track there?
Kind of, yeah. So, I got this keyboard and didn't know how to do anything with it. So I was just kind of pressing buttons. I have these kind of ideas in my head and I was trying to bring them to life. So I kind of figured out that the keyboard was just pretty much multipliers by 8. So I was like, okay, so if I do it at this tone, I can kind of complement it at the next octave up. And it was that kind of maths. And that kind of sums up my way of approaching things in general. I'm very logical. I try to understand how things work. And I think maths is quite a logical kind of thing to do. So when I think about it, I didn't do that great on my GCSEs. I don't know what you call it in the States.
That's like your college admission exam. Okay.
Exactly. I didn't do the best in those, but maths was, I did really well on maths. Maths and IT were my highest grades. So yeah, I think it kind of makes sense, the musical side of things and, being able to translate that into just even the way I was even approaching project management and just the logical thinking and understanding what was going on in the background and how you get from A to Z or whatever the destination is. And I guess I never really thought about it until you asked me that question, but I guess I've kind of taken that same mindset into the work I do today. So that's a good spot.
Yeah, super interesting. Yeah, it's like, after, I think we're now, on the 27th episode of the Op Show, and I've like, I'm always surprised and enamored with everyone's like stories and how, humans are just so varied and interests are so varied, but like music keeps coming up, and as far as these like technical tracks and so a lot of times first and then some development kind of comes later. Either that or someone started coding when they were like 5 years old or something. I think was way Kyle, the founder of CTO.ai's story was that something like this, or it went through gaming. I mean, so some people have like this, like I wanted to figure out how to program games, or like got into games and then figure out a program.
Actually, it's funny you say that because so when it came to picking my subjects for GCSEs, I didn't really have any intentions of doing IT, right? And maths is mandatory. So, you do this like kind of like parents' evening where all the different teachers for the different subjects try to sell their courses to you and your parents. And there was a guy called Mr. Fungstock. He was my IT teacher. And, he pulled my dad to one side and said, look, I don't really care what Robert wants. He needs to do IT, right? That I'm telling you, he needs to do IT, right? So, I wasn't aware of that conversation until I got home, and my dad was like, yeah, so, you're doing history, you're doing this. And then he said, you're doing IT. And I was like, whoa, IT. He was like, yeah, why you don't like it? So I was like, well, no, because all my friends are doing business studies, right? He said, well, in the classroom, you have no friends. That was one of my dad's favorite lines, right? And, he's my dad, so you do as you're told, right? So
he means like as like a competition, like it's kind of a competition, or
just more a case of when you get into the classroom, like the priority has to be learning and progressing yourself, and like you leave friendships to the playground. So the fact that I wanted to do business studies was not because I was really interested in how businesses operated. It was more a case of all of my friends doing business studies, or PE was the other subject as well. But I'm glad I didn't do PE because I
harder career track there.
Harder subject, shout out to everyone that did PE because that's some deep science you have to learn there,
Okay. There's interesting like PE track with like public schools and in the US. Let's pop over a little bit to like the idea of your workflows and like, you know, how you kind of like optimize or automate on a daily basis. Do you have any like, you know, tips and tricks for the audience? You know, how do you kind of like settle in every day, and like, are there certain tools and things that you use or systems of thinking that, you know, help you kind of be more productive?
Yeah, this is definitely a productivity question. So the caveat I'm going to throw out there is I am still a work in progress. Right? I am someone who's not afraid to try new things. So, you know, since I started HashiCorp, I'm a big fan of HashiCorp. So when you start in a role for working for a company like that, you get excited and you want to do so many different things. But, you know, I only have these two things here. And there's only 24 hours in a day, of which I can't spend all of that working. So I found I wasn't really managing my time too well. So I've been trying out different things. Some things haven't worked well for me. Other things are showing signs of working. So I tend to start my week off on a Monday with an hour planning, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I use that word planning very loosely because, you know, things come up that you can't plan for, and, you know, what are you going to do? And if you kind of stick too closely to a plan and then something throws it out, then it can kind of mess up your whole week. Mm-hmm. But I kind of have like, I prioritize the tasks that by the end of the week, I need to finish, or I really want to finish, or maybe a milestone that I need to reach in these tasks. And I schedule time in my diary to work specifically on that. And, you know, when I have these things, I literally put do not disturb on, I come out Slack and I focus on that, right? And I have a to-do list as well. So I use, it's a Google household here. So I have a Nest Hub here. So I talk to that a lot, and I sort of tell it the things I want to do, and I schedule in time, and I have alarms that go off when that time is up, right? So no matter how far I've gotten an exercise, I time box. I treat it like a spike. So once that time is up, it doesn't matter if I haven't gotten to where I was supposed to have gotten to there. I stop and I move on to whatever the next thing is. And so far, that's working really well for me, because even if I don't finish the things that I want to finish by the time I want to finish it, there's definitely like demonstrable progress, which is the key thing. And you know, I'm the sort of person that aims for progress over perfection anyway. So that seems to be working well for me. The other trick I have up my sleeve is a lot of the time when I'm working on something and I run into some kind of issue or a problem I can't figure out, sometimes I can waste, let's just say I've set aside 2 hours to work on something, and then half an hour into it, I run into an issue. I could easily waste an hour and a half trying to troubleshoot that issue. And by the end of that time, just be no closer to the finishing line. So I kind of have this 15-minute rule. If after 15 minutes, I don't have any progress on it, I switch on my PlayStation. And I just literally block it out. And one of two things happens. Either while I'm playing the PlayStation, the solution comes to my head, or I'll kind of play the PlayStation, I'll switch it off and go back to it with fresh eyes and a fresh kind of view on it. And I start to see different possibilities. That works out really well for me. And I kind of take that back to, I learned that from, I used to work for a consultancy called Valtech, and we did a big project with a company I'm not going to name. And I want to shout out a developer called Ovase and another one called Dima, and Alice as well. Let's not forget Alice. We used to run into problems a lot. We were doing a big serverless project for this client, and you know, none of us had ever done serverless before. There wasn't much documentation out there for some of the things that we were trying to do. So quite often we would say, should we go to the foosball table, which we had one in the office, and the amount of times that would help us solve the problems or see things a lot clearer. So, you know, now I work from home. You know, HashiCorp is a remote company. The PlayStation is kind of my foosball, I guess. So that's a big one for me, I think.
I love that. I feel like it's not too often that you end up, it's kind of like my productivity hack is the PlayStation and very relevant today too, because PS5 came out. So, you know, I'm excited I've been waiting to finally get a system again. So now I'm going to try this out a little bit because I think it probably kind of aligns, right? Like you're with the timing, it's kind of like that Pomodoro timer. You know, you time block things, and oftentimes you can finish them in less time than it would have taken if you just leave it open ended. And I like, you know, when you're trying to troubleshoot something, like I think about this, like I write a lot, and if I'm trying to write something, and you know, if I spend all my time going out and trying to research the article, then you lose your flow, and you're kind of switching in and out of that context. And I think actually in the community, in the ops community today, even like someone was talking kind of about the context switching fact of, like, you know, how you, like, they kind of were showing this tweet that had you know, a time block. It was like time to get ready for the meeting, time for the meeting, and then time to like get back into what I was doing before, you know, before I had to have the meeting for a developer. And I was like, yeah, like the context switching doesn't seem like it's become as you know, one, you're talking about it almost as a useful tool, and then two, like it hasn't also been maybe as realized on a mainstream basis, so that it's you know, respected in that same way. So it's really, I like this idea of, like, you know, also switching to something creative.
I think it's also about knowing yourself as well. So, you know, I've seen a lot of people kind of say that they have productivity tips and kind of put it out there and say that. And, you know, some people will see these things and it works wonders for them. And other people like myself who will see these things and think, you know what, what's the harm in trying it? Let's give it a go. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And a lot of the things I've seen just simply don't work for me. So, you know, I've kind of throw out the caveat that what I'm doing, it works well for me. If you have a system that's not working for you, definitely give what I'm doing a shot. Don't be afraid to try it, but also recognize if it's not working for you, you know, because what I'm doing, it works to my strengths and my weaknesses. You know, some people will switch on the PlayStation, for example, and get into gaming mode, and they will struggle to switch back to work. And if you're that type of person, then what I'm doing is probably not going to work for you. So, you know, it's an old African proverb, like know thyself, and just kind of take that into account when you're taking advice.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's great, because yeah, everything is, you know, definitely needs to be personalized and customized. So yeah, I mean, so that's something like, you know, then I'm curious, like, you know, if you take this like a level up, you know, these are some, you know, some kind of human skills. Like, do you use any technologies or tools to then do some of these things, or even beyond, like, you know, utilize certain types of software in order to remain productive?
Yeah. So, so like I mentioned, my house is fully kitted out with Google, from Nest hubs to speakers to CCTV to doorbells, you name it. It's a Google household. I also have a Google Pixel 4, so no matter where I am, I kind of have access to that kind of compute wherever I am. So I talk to Google a lot. You know, if something pops into my head, like an idea that's going to progress something, I just kind of tell Google to add it to a task list. And it's easy for me because when I go to plan my week, I will see all these things here, and it's quite easy to kind of put it together as kind of subtasks of the main thing. And, you know, in terms of timing, like I say, I keep a Google Nest Hub on my desk. So the moment I'm starting something, if I've time boxed a certain amount of time, I tell Google to set the timer for that. You know, as soon as that alarm goes off, then we move to the next thing. In terms of like background music to kind of motivate myself, and you know, I play it all through the Google speaker as well. Except I share an office with my wife, so she's in a meeting, and that gets a little bit problematic. But yeah, in general, we rely heavily on Google. You know, I have it on my iPad as well, so I keep my iPad to the side. And one thing that really works well for me as well is the to-do list on my iPad. As you start to get things ticked off on there, it's really motivating. You know, as you start to see these things here, even when you're struggling with something, the fact that you see so many ticks is kind of the thing that will just give you that kind of second wind, kind of to kind of push you over the line. So yeah, these things are really key for me. And one of the most underrated things that I don't think enough people use is, I mean, I have a Apple MacBook Pro, and there's this handy little button that says "Do not disturb." Right?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, you should use that. You know, the same with Slack. all those kinds of things there. Sometimes you just need focus time, and you need to switch off and not be distracted by anyone. And, the messages will be there when it's the right time. So I definitely use that a lot.
Yeah, that's a big, maybe just happiness hack for me. And I think it's doing that on my phone. And obviously it's functional during work with Slack or your MacBook. But yeah, that just having the do not disturb on my phone is like you're opting in to when you want to do these things, and you're not being controlled by the constant flow of notifications. So I love that.
100%, especially emails. I think with emails, actually, I don't have my emails open. I kind of block time in my diary to check emails every single day. And, I tend to do that towards the end of the day because, you start your day by looking at emails. Sometimes you'll see some things that will just throw your whole plan or your whole focus out. And really and truly, it can wait. If you need me urgently, Slack is definitely the way to go. Definitely send me a Slack. And as long as I'm not on focus time, I'll respond straight away. If I am on focus time, then as soon as I kind of come off of that, I always check my Slack messages. So yeah, I think that's kind of key. I mean, I used to start my day off by going through my inbox, and before you know it, you're 2 hours into your day and you haven't even accomplished anything. You've just been reading emails and replying to things, and and my team is globally distributed. A lot of my colleagues are in the US, so why does it matter for me to start my day off with that when they're not coming online for another 4 or 5 hours at least? So,
yeah, I like your hour block at the beginning of the week. And a lot of times I'll try to even do like that. What are the top 3 things I want to do today? And I feel like, yeah, that guidance really, because there's unlimited things, you can always do online or with work. It's like you could be productive, but not productive at the same time. Definitely. So go into a little bit of the HashiCorp experience. This is a digital by default company. Like they've always been remote, right?
Yes.
And so tell a little bit about how they structure the company and how they manage those, that sort of like all remote team sort of experience.
So, I mean, firstly, I'll say this is the first time I've worked for a company which is 100% remote. So, I mean, I did a lot of remote working myself, but it usually used to be 2 to 3 days a week in some kind of client site, and then the other days I'd be working from home. So in terms of onboarding, I have to say it's stupidly efficient, right? So I think maybe even a month and a half before I started, I had my laptop here. I had, access to systems, pretty much everything except source code, right? It was all kind of ready for me. And then on day one, that was it. I had this email notification and it said you have access to all these GitHub repos. And I was just like, wow. In terms of support, you get a buddy. So I have Eric. Eric is a good friend and colleague of mine. So literally I start my day off by having a Zoom with Eric, and he'll kind of walk you through kind of the things that you need to know for onboarding. And, we have what do they call it? Asana is the tool that they use. So you have all your tasks for onboarding inside there, and he'll just kind of walk you through how that works. And, it's normally a 90-day kind of plan.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's the onboarding. You never once feel like you're alone, even though you're at home. It's a weird one. And actually, Kareem, one of my colleagues, Kareem, he started the week before me, and I can remember him sending me a message before I started saying, "Rob, you're gonna love it here. I can't believe it. I'm working from home, and not once have I felt alone. Anytime I need any questions answered or I need anything, just there's always someone there. You're gonna love it." And I was like, "Wow, this guy has just started a few days ago, and he's already talking like that." And after day one, I kind of realized that the company is deeply ingrained in their culture, remote working. Right? So in terms of how to respect people's working environment, time zones. I mean, I speak to Eric and Kareem all the time, and they've gotten familiar with my wife because I share an office with her, and we all have banter, and it's it's deeply rooted in the culture, and it's the kind of thing that I think it starts from the top. So if you look at Mitchell and you look at Armon, a lot of their ethos definitely filters down the ranks. And I think you can safely say, yeah, we have great people at HashiCorp, but it definitely starts with those two. They've made sure that the company is a certain way.
Yeah, that's really cool. Just the thoughtfulness in building a company. It reminds me of, and like the scale too. And like they've been able to maintain it, because sometimes scaling that culture can be so difficult. Makes me think of like Buffer as another very public example of like kind of this, fully remote transparency, just new style of business. And I'm excited to see more and more businesses adopt this. And that was probably one of the great, positive things that came out of COVID, was this fact of like remote being okay, and just kind of forcing a lot of companies to have to figure it out, and then realize like, oh, if we set the right structure, create the right culture, then we can actually do this. So I think that's been a really incredible thing. So yeah, I mean, that's really interesting to hear on like the cultural side. Now, talk to us a little bit about like your stack, like, or like the tools, whether it's HashiCorp or other favorites you have. Like, what are some of the things that you use on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that you're really into right now?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll kind of point out there is part of my job is to understand other people's workflows, right? So I'm definitely not a security expert, but I work in the security field, right? So one of my biggest learnings throughout my career, especially when it comes to security, is, and you're talking about developers here, providing a good developer experience is the single most important thing that's going to determine the success of any security platform that you deploy within an organization, right? So, when I think about how developers work, and why some things are less secure than others, it's not because developers are lazy, or it's not because they're not good enough or anything like that. It's just that they have a particular workflow, and it's going to take a lot for them to come out of that workflow. I mean, it's just broken, it's working for them. So you need to find ways to integrate into the way that they want to work to give you the added security value, right? So I spend a lot of time kind of figuring it out. And in terms of how I figure that out, it always starts obviously locally with my own development environment. So, typically I used to use things like Docker Compose, which is great. But then when I joined HashiCorp, Eric and Nick Jackson, another big shout out, Nick Jackson, they introduced me to a tool that they came up with called Shipyard Run. So what is Shipyard Run? So it's a way of, a bit like Docker Compose, you can kind of define your local development environments in code, right? So the difference is, the thing about Docker Compose is sometimes when you have really complicated environments with so many different kind of pieces, it sometimes doesn't handle some of the lower level dependencies too well. So I think the way that Shipyard started was they were writing a bunch of bash scripts to try and tie all these different things together. And, they came up with something that was working really well. But when it's all said and done, it's bash scripts and, using make files to run certain things and so on and so forth, right? So they thought, we should actually just turn this into a command line tool. So now we have Shipyard Run. You can define your environments, so your networks, your ingress controllers. You can run entire Kubernetes clusters on there. You can run entire Nomad clusters on there, or you can just run containers directly. And yeah, you describe it all in HCL, which is the HashiCorp configuration language. And the beautiful thing about it is we call these blueprints, right? So you have a blueprint for an environment, right? And the good thing is, if I was to write a blueprint and you wanted to use it, all you would have to do is point to my GitHub repo. So you would literally just type in Shipyard Run and then point to the GitHub repo, and then it will run that for you. So you don't even need the code locally on your machine. So in terms of collaborating, it's really nice, because, if I'm doing a webinar with someone from a different company and I say, oh, don't worry, I'll set up the Vault environment for you. It's as simple as, just as long as they have Shipyard installed, they have Docker and Git are the two dependencies. They could just literally just do Shipyard Run, give them the URL, and then I have a working environment on their machine. So that's, for me, absolutely key and fundamental to that. So definitely people out there, check that out. It's go to the website, which is shipyard.run. It has full tutorials on there. And to be honest, I haven't even gone through half of the tutorials because it's so easy to use. It's really easy to understand. And I think you can just install it with Brew as well if you're a Mac user. So it's really cool.
I'll drop that into the description so it's easy to find. Yeah, that sounds really, really useful. What else are you working on or utilizing?
So aside from Shipyard, the other thing I'll point out is, so I do a lot of collaborating and pair programming with Kareem, sometimes Eric. So one of the tools that I like a lot is Visual Studio Code, right? Now, the reason why I like Visual Studio Code is it has something called Live Share on it. So it's an extension that you can install. And with this Live Share, you literally can start a session and, you know, I think Microsoft owns GitHub now. So all the authentication is done with GitHub, right? So you can literally send someone a link. They'll log in with their GitHub and they can join your live share session, which means that in real time, they can see the code that I'm typing. They can type the code themselves if you give them that level of access. So, you know, we can work together on a file or on a program or whatever it is. And then where it takes it a step further is you can also share the terminal as well. So you literally it's like being in the same room on the same computer with your buddy. So to me, that's a really big plus. And just to kind of point out as well, the other tool that I'm using as an IDE is I use Goland. Shout out to Kareem again, because he's the one that got me on that. Goland's absolutely awesome, especially when you're writing Terraform, other than its main purpose, which is Golang. And what I've noticed is, I think it might be in beta, so I stand to be corrected there, but they have a similar feature to LiveShare, which is coming out on Goland. So I think a lot of these companies are starting to realize that, you know, collaboration is the key, but we're not always in the same room. And, you know, providing that good developer experience is crucial. You know, I can sort of write some code, and while I'm writing it, Kareem can review it, or it can review it, and he can say, you know, I think it's a bit cleaner if you do it this way. And, you know, they can just kind of type it out and we can kind of educate each other and learn from each other at the same time. And, you know, it's just like kind of reviewing while coding at the same time. So that is really, really useful. And I'm really happy to see that Goland I think it's in beta at the moment, so it's not the smoothest experience on Goland, but I think the fact it's there, it goes to show their intentions. And anyone that knows JetBrains, they make absolutely amazing tools. So I have no doubt in my mind that they're absolutely going to nail this feature.
Well, maybe this is a good time to jump into, you know, what are your DevOps, Rob? What are what are some of your predictions for the future of developer operations, the DevOps market, certain trends you're seeing? You know, also like HashiCorp just had a big conference. You know, what are some of these trends in the industry that you've been seeing bubble up?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's a new trend, but it's definitely something that's getting a lot more focus, which is kind of embedding security into workflows, into sort of the software the development lifecycle. So, I mean, I've been talking about this for years because I've been learning about it for years. And, you know, it kind of felt like a bit of a niche kind of conversation to be having. Like, a lot of people were just like, oh, okay, yeah, it sounds cool. Yeah, I'm not really interested in that. But I think now the shift left mentality is something that's kind of taken a hold quite a bit. And I actually don't really like the term shift left, because it kind of gives the impression that, you know, you kind of think about security in the beginning, and as long as you've done that, you don't have to have it embedded in every single phase of the life cycle, which is just simply not true, right? And I think we're getting greater understanding of these kind of things. So I think if you look at things like serverless is obviously a trend that's on the up, and AWS Lambda is the kind of de facto standard for serverless. There are others out there, but that seems to be the one that people are using as the go-to. So I think even with their new announcement about the Lambda extensions, and we at HashiCorp have built an extension so you can use Vault with your Lambdas and inject secrets into your runtimes. So it's these kind of things that I'm starting to see people taking more seriously. The fact that you can do something like that with Lambda and Vault together is just showing the mindset of both HashiCorp and Amazon in this example. And it won't be long before some of the other big clouds kind of take a similar approach. And even if it's not just the big clouds, I think people are just generally, when they're building their own tooling, thinking, well, how can we embed security into this, right? How do we make this secure? What actually is the attack surface? And, how do we mitigate against that? So, like I said, it's not really a new trend, but I think it's something that people are definitely taking more seriously. And I think, you have like a lot more high profile breaches and exposures now. So you look at the new tool that we announced, that HashiCorp Boundary is kind of the type of tool that people would look at and say, okay, we should be able to use something like this going forward to limit our exposure to like highly privileged credentials, for example, or just credentials in general. You've got like a really clearly defined blast radius. And I think if you have that kind of mindset, you're going to have a good chance of protecting your systems, your customers, and your infrastructure.
Yeah. That was a really interesting announcement, I think. What was that, day one of the conference? I think that's a really novel approach into how to, like you're saying, to always be thinking about security at every step of the way, where sometimes it's kind of like especially like in the startup world, where it's kind of like, you like slap on some glue and some paint and you kind of like, and when it breaks, that's when it becomes a problem, and versus like the kind of reactionary versus being proactive focus on it.
Yeah. I think one of the other trends is you have like, so Kubernetes is like, obviously it's the big dog, right? It's the platform that everyone wants to use, right? In some cases, rightfully, in some cases, in my personal opinion, that's what it is. Probably is not the best fit, but nonetheless, it has a great community around it. But I think one of the drawbacks of platforms like Kubernetes is the management overhead of the clusters, right? And I say platforms like Kubernetes because we can say the same thing about Vault, for example. We can say the same thing about Console. We can say the same thing about most of these major platforms, is they are complicated to manage on a day-to-day. You need people with very specific skill sets to keep your applications running all the time. So the whole managed approach is definitely something that I think more and more software vendors are kind of taken seriously. So, we have on the big cloud platforms, you have managed Kubernetes, for example. We at HashiCorp, where we've announced the private beta for managed Vault, which is it's a good job I'm not in consulting anymore, because I made a lot of income from that skill set there. But I recognize that clients, they hired me in because they need to extract value from things like Vault, but they don't have the skill sets in-house to do it, and it just maybe is not a good fit for them to try and bring that skill set in full time, right? So the whole managed approach is definitely, I mean, for me, I've had a dream about a managed Vault for many years now. So I'm really glad to kind of see something in the making at the moment. And I can't wait for the wider world to really benefit from that. So yeah, that's a big one. Managed services at the moment, more SaaS kind of based tooling, I think.
Yeah. And do you see like, it's this enterprise level, or are you seeing this at all stages of a business?
Okay. So when we're talking about security, so what I see is you're going to have certain institutions, so mainly financial institutions, which are very heavily regulated. Now, because of the regulations, they want to have absolute control over everything. So they would normally want to host their own tools, their own services. So, I mean, even things like GitHub, they'll have GitHub Enterprise and they'll run that on premise, right? But then, you know, they can afford to do that because we're talking about financial institutions that kind of underpin the global economy. And, you know, as the average Joe, I'm really happy that they do that and they're taking security seriously because we all have, you know, a stake in this, I guess, right? As members of this world. But then you kind of go down to other large enterprises who maybe are not so heavily regulated. They are a lot more open to managed solutions, especially now that businesses are being asked to do a lot more with less, and that filters down to departments. So you'll have managers that are given smaller budgets and even bigger goals to achieve. So things like managed solutions is something that's really attracted to some of these organizations just because it helps them manage that kind of budget. It costs a lot less to spend on managed services than it does to hire full-time skill sets in, which are, you know, some of the highest paid skill sets in the industry. And I think in terms of medium and small, it's the same kind of thing. They're always going to look for the managed solutions where possible. You know, if you're a startup, for example, you want to focus on building the thing, whatever it is that your startup is all about. And you don't really have time to be thinking about your secrets management in that sense, or thinking about your cluster management in Kubernetes. You just don't have the time and resources. You just want to focus on shipping great products to your customers, right? So that's definitely, I mean, like I said, I don't think SaaS is a new idea. It's something that's been out there for a while. But I think some of the bigger platforms that people have been struggling to manage themselves for the last few years, well, now they don't have to. Now it's all managed. So it takes a lot of headache away and you can just kind of focus on your core business.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. And then I guess there comes the complexity of managing so many different, the world of microservices and all these, and trying to manage all the managed services in that sense. And how do you kind of like bring them together in a control plane, observable sort of way? And I think that's the you know, something that we find very interesting is like that, bringing that simplicity to a complex world across, but you being able to use your favorite tools regardless of what those are. So we're a little bit over the hour, but it's been a wonderful conversation. You've already had so many shout outs. I've loved it. You'll have to give me some Twitter handles so we can shout them out properly. But any other, you know, where can we find you online? Any other shout outs that you'd like to, and last words you'd like to mention?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, online, I'm probably most active on Twitter. That's kind of where I spend a lot of my time. So yeah, just follow me on Twitter. So it's at DevOps_Rob. My inbox is open as well. So if you want to DM me about anything, I'm always happy to chat. Aside from that, I also have a website, which is DevOpsRob.com. Which, yeah, I'll admit, I've been a bit quiet on there. I've been quite active on Twitter and not really posting as much articles on there. But yeah, definitely kind of check in on my website because there will be some new content coming out. And I also have a YouTube, which I'm going to start posting to. And unfortunately, I don't have 100 subscribers yet. So I can't have a custom URL for that. So I can't give you that. But, you know, I'm going to tweet it. So, you know, if you want to show me
you
some
can
love.
Still, you know, give it YZX18887.
For those with photographic memories out there, we got you covered.
Yeah, send that to me. We'll put it in the description too.
No doubt.
We'll have to start a hashtag DevOps Rob, I think, after the show as well.
Lovely. I never thought I'd be a hashtag. Mom, I made it.
And mom's like, what's a hashtag?
Exactly.
Well, Rob, it was a pleasure. Thank you for coming on, sharing a bit about your experience in HashiCorp and some of your favorite tools. Looking forward to sharing this out. And thanks again. That's it for us. And I'll take us out.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.